Hello friends, as part of the crash course on the current affairs, we have been discussing the issues relating to current affairs, the potential questions that may be asked from those issues in the civil service examinations. We have seen several issues and I hope that was useful to you. Similarly, we shall move on to the other issues that have been in news in the recent past. Next issue is again it is another fundamental right which is relating to right to dignified burial. During the COVID pandemic, there have been several deaths, COVID deaths. We all know. The main problem of the COVID death is that a person who is tested positive with COVID virus, and if he dies, then the government undertook to cremate or bury the dead body of the person on its own instead of handing it over to the families. The reason was the potential spreading, in order to stop the spreading of the pandemic to the persons belonging to the dead person's, deceased person's family. Though it is a welfare act, it created an issue of fundamental right to life under Article 21. Right? Article 21 of the Constitution provides for the right to life and personal liberty. 21 provides that no person shall be deprived of his right to life or personal liberty except according to the procedure established by law. And this Article 21, and especially the right to life, has been subjected to wide interpretation by the Supreme Court, which has given rise to a new set of rights known as the implied rights. Because in several cases, including the Unni Krishnan case, the Supreme Court had interpreted right to life as the right to live with human dignity. The court has ruled that the right to life guaranteed by Article 21 is not a mere right to animal existence, but it is a right to live with human dignity, and this dignity is in consonance with the preamble to the Constitution of India. When you read the right to life along with the preamble to the Constitution of India, you will understand that right to life is not a mere right to animal existence of breathing in and breathing out, but it is a right to live with human dignity. So, as part of right to life, so according to Supreme Court, let me give you a clear flow chart. If you want, you can make note of that. Right to life is right to live with human dignity, which in turn gives the right to die with dignity, which in turn, according to the recent judgment of the Madras High Court, the right to die with dignity, human dignity, includes right to be buried with dignity. So remember, this right to life means right to live with human dignity, which includes right to die with dignity and the right to be buried with dignity. As a result, remember, this is yet another reason why it was in news. The right to die with human dignity. Here the court said right to die does not give you, or right to life, right to live with human dignity does not guarantee right not to live. Meaning, committing suicide is not a fundamental right. You cannot say, I have right to live, so I will have equally the right not to live. I don't want to live means I can exercise my right to live by choosing not to live, and therefore I have the right to commit suicide. No, it is not permitted. The court ruled very clearly. The court said the right to live with human dignity means the right to live until the natural death. And while having the natural death, you have the right to die with human dignity and the right to be buried with human dignity, as interpreted by the Madras High Court in the recent judgment during the COVID pandemic. However, the court ruled that, person attempting to commit suicide is not a crime. See, previously this judgment was given in the year 2019. Previously, under the Indian law, any attempt to commit suicide was regarded as an IPC crime, and the person will be subjected to criminal action, penal action. The court ridiculed this law, and the judges said that supposing if a person commits suicide, he attempting to commit suicide only after having reached a position where he will not be able to live. To that extent, he is depressed, he is distressed, and with the maximum distress, he chooses to end his life. If he succeeds, he is not punished. If he fails, he is punished by law. This is illogical and unreasonable. Therefore, attempting to commit suicide should not be declared as a crime, and it declared that it is unconstitutional, therefore struck it down. However, committing suicide is not a fundamental right. So these are all the three important things with respect to right to life you have to understand. Hope it's clear to you. Then let us go to the next issue. Again, Article 21 is one of the very, very important provisions of the Constitution, and quite a lot is involved in Article 21. Please do read them. Right? Then comes the next important issue of the Supreme Court's ruling relating to the elections. The court has directed all the political parties to publish the criminal antecedents of the members of the party, especially when they are set up as a candidate for any assembly elections, any Lok Sabha or Legislative Assembly elections, or Rajya Sabha or Legislative Council elections. So when a political party sets up a person as its candidate in any election, it has to publish his criminal history. This has been in news. This has a history basically. See, along with this, you have to understand and read the topic, criminalization of politics, right, and politicization of crime. These are cyclically related. Politicization of crime will result in criminalization of politics, and criminalization of politics will again result in politicization of crime. So this topic is important for your paper 1, essay, paper 2, then ethics, public administration, Indian society, sociology, political science, wherever it is, it's very, very important topic. The ethical dimension of criminalization of politics we can discuss later. But this has been a news for quite long. Since 2005 4, when the Supreme Court gave a judgment directing the Election Commission to take steps to keep the public informed about the criminal antecedents of the candidates contesting in elections. It has been in news then onwards. In fact, in 1999 itself, we had appointed a committee headed by N.N. Ora to probe through the nexus between politicians, criminals and the bureaucrats. Surprisingly and shockingly, N.N. Ora committee found that there was a very close nexus between politicians, criminals and bureaucrats, which has now resulted in the menace of the problem of criminalization of politics. So please do make note of it. Now this is a question to be asked in the prelims also. It is the Supreme Court has directed the political parties and it has also directed the Election Commission to verify that. Right? Make note of that under the Representation of People's Act. Right, under the Representation of People's Act, it is important for your mains as well. When it comes to mains, we will discuss in detail these topics. Then another important issue relating to the current development is the appointment of the Comptroller and Auditor General of India. Right? Recently, Girish Chandra Murmu has been appointed as the CAGI. He is a retired IAS officer who was appointed as the Lieutenant Governor of Jammu and Kashmir, the Lieutenant Governor of the new Union Territory, Jammu and Kashmir. From being a Lieutenant Governor, he is now called back and has been appointed as the CAGI. This is one of the important issues here. Now what you have to understand or what you have to verify, what you have to study here is the constitutional provisions relating to CAGI, especially the appointment. Article 148 to 151 deal with the provisions of CAGI. According to Article 148, the CAGI is appointed by the President by a warrant under his hand and seal, and according to the advice of the Council of Ministers. And the CAGI is one of the very important officers. It is a quasi-judicial parliamentary officer, quasi-judicial, quasi-legislative function, and being a quasi-judicial officer, he is to enjoy the independence guaranteed by the Constitution. Therefore, he will be appointed by the President by a warrant under the hand and seal. He will be appointed by a warrant under the hand and seal of the President. Will hold office for 6 years or 65 years of age, whichever is earlier, and he can be removed only on the like grounds and the like manner as a judge of Supreme Court can be removed. His salary, allowances and conditions of services are charged on the Consolidated Fund of India, and it cannot be altered during his term of office, and he has a fixed tenure of 6 years or 65 years of age, whichever is earlier, as I already told you. So these kind of independences are there. Now, when a person who had been a bureaucrat has been appointed as a Lieutenant Governor is being called and appointed as CAGI, it is creating some controversy relating to the independence of the CAGI. So for the prelims, go through the constitution provisions of CAGI, and for the mains, go through the independence of the CAGI, especially public administration students. Please do make note of it. The independence of CAGI can be a question in the mains. It has already been asked. In the mains, paper 2, they have already asked. Just verify, we shall discuss during mains. The second aspect of the CAG, which I already told you, is the independence of the office. Right? Independence of the office. And for the mains and essay, you can talk about the politicization of constitutional officers and bureaucracy. Similarly, you can also read for the mains along with independence the role of CAG. What role does he play with respect to public accountability? So this is another issue you can make note of. Then comes the suspension of MP Lads scheme. due to COVID and the economic setback, the government has decided to suspend the Members of Parliament Local Area Development Fund scheme for the next 5 years. So make note of this, because MP lads has been a controversial element, and more than prelims, this is important for your mains. In the prelims, you can be asked about what is this all about, what is MP lads, and whether it is continuing or not. And under the MP lad scheme, every MP will be given 5 crores per year, using which he has to develop his constituency. In case of Rajya Sabha MP, he can use anywhere within the state or anywhere in India. With respect to Lok Sabha MPs, they have to do it within their constituencies, and they have to create physical assets. They are not supposed to spend the money for any other purpose, but they have to go in for creating physical assets, and they have to coordinate with the district collector as the District Rural Development Agency, chairperson of District Rural Development Agency, and other NGOs. They had the leverage, and there have been several recommendations for suspending this. In fact, the Standing Committee of the Parliament, in fact, second ARC had recommended for suspending of this MP lad scheme, and there have been several recommendations for continuing with the scheme. Anyway, make note of this. What can be asked in the prelims is only how much and what can be done with this. For the mains, you can go in for the analytical aspect of MP lads scheme, right? And yet another issue is relating to the 10th conference of the CAT, 10th annual conference of the Central Administrative Tribunal. The administrative tribunals are provided for by the Constitution 42nd Amendment Act. In the Constitution 42nd Amendment Act 1976 inserted Article 323A and Article 323B. 323A for administrative tribunals and 323B for other tribunals. For instance, Central Administrative Tribunal and State Administrative Tribunal are falling under Article 323A. And other tribunals like Income Tax Tribunal or Railway Rates Tribunal and such other tribunals will fall under Article 323B. So administrative tribunals are quasi-judicial bodies, right? Quasi-judicial bodies and alternative mechanisms to deal with administrative issues which do not have purely legal issues, where the courts may not be able to deal with. For example, if there was an issue relating to, say, recruitment or salary and conditions of service of a government employee, this does not involve a question of law, and courts may not be competent to deal with this issue. Hence, administrative tribunals was brought in. Otherwise, similarly, they have simplified procedures. Administrative tribunals have simplified procedures. They have less cost because you don't have to engage any advocate or a lawyer to argue your case. You yourself can argue, and it will have experts, subject matter experts in the field. For example, if it is administrative, then civil servants will be there. If it is a service tax GST tribunal or income tax tribunal, income tax officials will be there. So experts will be there along with the judges, and so they are important. See, this has been asked in the prelims. The recent past couple of years back in 2017 or so, they have asked this question relating to administrative tribunal, because the administrative tribunals, why the administrative tribunals are advantageous? They are simplified. They follow a simplified procedure. They are less cumbersome procedure. They are less costlier, and they have expertise than the judges. So these are the advantages. This was asked in the prelims also. Even now it can be asked. So is the case with other tribunals also. And remember, this can be asked in the mains, particularly in the public administration as well. So make note of these issues. Let us continue with the other issues in the subsequent sessions. Hope things are useful for you and going good. Thank you very much, friends.